we will get started. So I hope everyone now can see the slides. And so today we're here to talk about strategies for resilience. And I don't know about you, but the last 2 years have been pretty hard, right? I think, in my lifetime, I haven't seen such economic, social, political health crises. And in spite of this, or actually because of these challenges, I think that the material that we're covering today in this course or this short hour together couldn't be more important. The mission of my company, Thrive 808, is to help organizations to build resilience and better navigate change, and to make work better using the science of psychology and what we know about well-being. And what we know is that resilient organizations really start with resilient individuals, and there's no better time to start building up the habits of resilience than now. You really build resilience in times of challenge and uncertainty that we're definitely living through. So I'd like to start with an overview of our 60 minutes together today and cover some logistics or things to be on the lookout for as I go through my presentation. First, we're going to cover the problem, burnout, a topic that probably a lot of us might be aware of and have some firsthand experience with. We'll look at some of the common symptoms and causes of burnout, and then move on to what do we do next? So, and this is resilience, right? We'll cover what I call the strength and flexibility model of resilience, and then cover how we actually build resilience through habits, looking at what they are and why they're important. And then we'll kind of put it all together and think about how do we build the 5 strengths of resilience in detail and look at how we can build habits in each of these areas. I'm going to kind of end with and spend the most time on the mental aspect of resilience and go into what's called real-time resilience, which is a set of tools and resources developed at the University of Pennsylvania, where I trained under the director of the founder of positive psychology, Martin Seligman. There'll be a short break after each section to answer any questions as well. So as I go through my presentation, you'll notice some of the following symbols. First, I'll be asking for your participation in a few different polls during the webinar. So when you see this little yellow icon, you'll know a poll is coming. They should pop up automatically on your screen. The second little green spotlight icon is to highlight when I'm providing a hyperlink to research or other articles that will be available in the PDF of these slides that you'll receive at the end of the webinar. For example, there's an underline here for resource next to research and resource links. And this actually goes to what's pictured here, this set of resilience resources that I edited along with some other colleagues in a consulting group. You'll see this research icon actually quite frequently. In addition to my consulting work, I've been an instructor in the psychology department at the University of Hawaii at Manoa for over 10 years. And as an organizational psychologist, I like to apply psychology to the workplace and use research to inform my recommendations for organizational change and workforce development. Third, we have these push pin icons, and that's really because I want you to take away practical tips and put them into action. So anytime you see this pink push pin, it's really something for you to take away and put into your life. The pencil icon is because I want this webinar to be as relevant to you as possible. So I encourage you to grab something to write with nearby. During the workshops I offer, we often have more time to brainstorm and reflect on how this material applies to your life. And in our short time today, I think it will still be helpful for you to jot down a few ideas as we go through the material together. And finally, there'll be short Q&A breaks where you can add questions into the chat. I actually see one now, and so that's great. So you can add them into the chat or into the Q&A section. And to answer your question, positive psychology is the study of well-being. So it started about in 1995, I believe, by Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. And he had been a clinical psychologist who had been looking mostly at things like depression and bipolar disease and schizophrenia. and turn the field to think about, why are we not thinking about the good things in life? Why don't research psychologists study well-being and positive relationships and all the things that go well in life? And so really there was this shift in the field to not only look at dysfunction, but positive function, positive psychology. So thank you for that question. And yes, so I'm glad that you folks know how to use the Q&A in the chat already. I will be stopping during these specific times for Q&A as we go through. All right, here we go. Please kind of count up to yourself the number of items that you agree with. So there's 1 through 6. So you might be at 0, or you might be at 6. But here are some symptoms of burnout. So as I read through them, just count to yourself how many you agree with. 1, I feel run down and drained of physical or emotional energy. 2, I have difficulty sleeping. 3, I lack enthusiasm and motivation to do my best on the job. 4, it feels like what I do doesn't matter. 5, considering my workload, there's no way I could do my job properly. And 6, I feel like I'm achieving less than I should. So if you could just count up your number of responses, I'm going to launch our poll. And I actually should have given us an option for 0, but I didn't. So there might be a little bit of a skew here. So 0 or 1. And you guys are quick responders. I see we are quickly climbing up to 100% participation. It's awesome. We're at about 88%, 90% now. I'll give you maybe another 10 seconds to respond. 5 seconds. All right. So let's see our results. Summer, if you could give me a hands up, or if everyone can see the poll actually. I don't know if it's, or if it has to be shared on the screen. Okay, you guys can see it. Great, thank you. So I didn't give you the option for 0, which was my mistake. But it looks like, everyone has, for the most part, experienced some of these symptoms, right? About 15% with 2, 18% with 3, 25% with 4, and 11% each for 5 and 6. So it really seems like, folks are kind of feeling some of these symptoms, right? All right. So what is burnout exactly? These questions that I showed, that it's definitely not a full diagnostic assessment. The most robust or used tool to measure burnout actually is a 22-item assessment called the Maslach Burnout Instrument. But these were just 6 items that kind of give us a sense for the definition of burnout, which is defined by the World Health Organization as chronic workplace stress. So it's really something that happens in the workplace, and it manifests in 3 different areas. Physical exhaustion. So you'll notice that 2 of those questions were related to exhaustion, not being able to sleep or feeling very physically exhausted and tired. Cynicism, that's where you feel like your work, doesn't matter. You feel like what you do doesn't make a difference, and there's just generally a feeling of cynicism that things aren't good and that they're not going to get better, right? And finally, reduced professional efficacy. So here, this is where you feel like you're not able to do a good job, that you're not doing as good a job as you were before, just, really feeling like you're less capable, doing worse, not able to actually perform the way you'd like to. And that's how the World Health Organization defines burnout, according to kind of manifesting or showing itself in these 3 ways. And so how common is it? This is a recent study done by McKinsey, the consulting company, together with Lean In, an organization. And they found that in 2021, out of 65,000 North American employees polled, 42% of women and 35% of men reported feeling burned out almost very often or almost always in 2021. And that's compared to 32% of women and 28% of men the previous year. And this is a problem, right? Because when people are burned out, studies have shown that, and this is a research done by Gallup, that burned out employees are actually 23% more likely to visit the ER. They're 63% more likely to take a sick day, which has costs, right, for the organization and for productivity. And they're 2.6 times more likely to actually quit their jobs. So this is why, burnout has real effects on the organization and certainly just on our own personal feeling of well-being. A little bit, another study, this one again done by Gallup, you'll notice that the numbers are a little different here, and that's often just based on the research done, the amount of people surveyed and what they found. So this one, the numbers are a little lower, but what we're still seeing is a pretty wide gender gap in burnout. So in 2019, 30% of women and 27% of men said they always or very often felt burned out at work. So that's a 3% difference. And then in 2021, this percentage gap actually increased to 12 points. So 34% of women and 26% of men reported feeling burnout. And I'll just go back a slide to show kind of how, that these numbers are a little lower than the report by McKinsey, which was about 42% of women in 2021. And here Gallup 34%. But what we're still seeing often is that there is this gap, right, in women feeling more burned out or reporting feeling more burned out than men. So what are some of the common causes of burnout? And, we know this because burnout has been researched for a very long time, actually, with, as I mentioned, tools like the Maslach Burnout Inventory. And so what we found is that there are several common causes of burnout that has started even before the pandemic, right? And these are the top. So an unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control. So where you feel like you can't, control your daily schedule or things that are getting added onto your plate. The third is insufficient rewards for effort. So when you feel like what you put in doesn't match what you get back, right? The fourth is a lack of a supportive community, not feeling kind of good about your colleagues or your workplace, a culture that's sort of unstable or lacking psychological safety here would contribute to this lack of a supportive community. The fifth would be a lack of fairness. So this can often be a very big one. So when we feel like things are inequitable or unfair, that really deteriorates our sense of our well-being and contributes to burnout. And finally, we may actually just be burned out because our values and our skills are mismatched with where we are. So I'm going to have another poll here. Which cause of burnout can you most relate to? An unsustainable workload, perceived lack of control, insufficient rewards for effort. Thank you all. We're at about 50%. I'll just give maybe another 5 seconds. We're at about 75% now. All right, and ending the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you. It's about 84% of folks able to join. And so we can see unsustainable workload, the top response at 43%, lack of control, 19%, insufficient rewards, 14%, And 799. Okay, so unsustainable workload, very high on the list here of kind of the causes of burnout that people are feeling or have felt maybe in the past. So looking, kind of returning to some of these causes, there has been some research done about why women are more burned out than men during the pandemic. This is still research that's being evolving, and it can be a little conflicting at times depending on the study and who's conducting the research. But some causes that I wanted to point out or kind of highlight, and some of them are kind of interesting. Women who actually are working remotely part of the time in what's called a hybrid workplace, so sometimes on site, sometimes at home, are actually at a higher burnout risk at 38%, versus women who are working exclusively from home or fully on site. And this might be because kind of blending these two worlds takes some coordination, and women often in the workplace are doing more of these coordinating activities like planning birthday lunches, pre-pandemic, or just kind of coordinating a lot of these extra social activities. And some of the, the hypothesis for this finding is because of that, that women are often taking on these extra roles to make hybrid work work. The second, pretty surprising finding is that the burnout gender gap has been relatively consistent across most industries. So, and even white collar industries compared to blue collar ones, women are generally more burned out than men. And so that's consistent across different industries. But managers are actually doing better than individual contributors. So the burnout gap seems to be highest for those who are individual contributors or not managers. And there's not clear reasons why yet, but it just seems like perhaps there's more managerial support for both women and men rather than in just individual contributor roles. And finally, parenthood. So here's one that we can probably imagine where women are feeling the burdens of the pandemic a little more disproportionately, from responsibilities at home, like supervising remote learning, more basic household chores. And again, some of the research has been a little conflicting here, but I think most folks have sort of seen or known friends, family, right, where this could be anecdotally true, that women just tend to take on more of the brunt of childcare during the pandemic. All right, so that's enough about the problem. What do we do now about it? What's the solution? So kind of as we switch gears now from, we've thought about burnout, we've thought about the symptoms and the causes. So what do we do? And here we're switching gears to resilience. And I want to do another quick poll on this statement. So please indicate whether you agree with me. Some people are naturally resilient and others aren't. I'm gonna agree or disagree. Some people are naturally resilient and others aren't. Just maybe another 5 seconds. We're pretty high on responding here, up to about 90% already. Do another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Well, this is interesting, right? So 75% agree that some people are naturally resilient and others aren't, and 25% disagree. And I love that we started with this because this is my first major point about resilience, which psychologists generally define as the ability to bounce back from adversity or stress. So resilience shows up because of adversity or stress, right? And actually, the point about this statement is that it's not true that resilience is not a fixed quality that we either have or don't have. And the general consensus among psychologists is that resilience is something that we can cultivate through practice. And that's why we're here, right? It's very natural and common to think of it as something we have or don't have, that I'm either a resilient person or I'm not. But the point is that we actually can change our mind on this, that we can look at resilience as something that is changeable and improvable through practice, through intentional, mindful, just like we go to the gym, right? Not all of us can become an Olympic athlete, but we can all get a little stronger. And that's the same idea with resilience. Unfortunately for humans, going through practice and working hard is never fun, right? No one, you might get to the point that you love going to the gym, but often for many of us, challenging ourselves through stress and challenge is difficult, right? But just as we go grow our muscles through strength training, similarly, we grow resilience through adversity. Okay, so this is our first mini reflection time. I'd like for you to think about a time when you were challenged or under stress. What did you do first? Did you call a friend? Did you eat? Did you go for a run? So I'd love for you to just take a moment and jot down, the last time that you really remember being really stressed out or challenged. So maybe just like write down the example, and then you can write down what you did, a couple of things that you did here. Just give us a moment. I think, again, the more we kind of really put this into practice in our life, the more benefit you'll get. So I'd love for everyone to take this opportunity. Okay. So what you may notice about the things that you wrote down, so the strategies that you turn to, is that we all have different coping strategies, right? And some of them are good and some of them are bad, or, bad in the sense that they might not always help us feel better, right? We may feel good in the moment, stress eating or with a glass of wine, but it maybe doesn't make us feel as good as a workout, right? So we all know that we have different coping strategies that we use, and some of them are really good for us. Some of them make us feel better, and others maybe don't contribute as much to our well-being. But they generally seem to all fit into one of these 5 different buckets. And these are the 5 strengths of resilience, as I call them. And that's physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual. And we all have different coping strategies in these areas. Physical, again, maybe going for a walk outside, stretching, or, physical could also just be lying down, taking a nap, having a glass of wine, right? These are all different things that we do that affect our body. So one of the things I asked you to think about is, what did you do first, right? What was your first natural tendency? And so for me, I found when I'm stressed out, the things that I do best are I most naturally turn to my physical bucket and my relationship bucket. So I will, through years of practice, when I'm stressed out, I know I need to just go for a little workout, go outside, go for a walk. I also turn to my relationships, right? I call a friend, I call my auntie, I talk to my husband. I know that I draw a lot of strength from my relationships. And on the converse side, my lowest bucket is actually mental. So I probably joined or became interested in psychology because of my mind's tendency to ruminate and wander and really spiral. And so I know that when I'm stressed out, my mental side can get a little weaker, that I'll spiral out, and it will be a little hard for me to kind of regain control. So another poll now, what is the top strength that you think you go to in challenging times? So this is your top natural strength, something that you feel like you kind of naturally go to when times are tough. So I'm at 60% right now. Just give another 10 seconds or so. This can be a little challenging one. All right, maybe 5 more seconds. All right, we're at about 87% and a pretty good split here. So 25% physical, 24% mental, 15% emotional, 28% social, and 8% turn to their spiritual strength. I think of, this makes me think of, I definitely know people like my auntie who, when things are tough, they just sort of figure it out for themselves, for herself, right? Like mentally, emotionally, pretty strong. And I'll talk a little bit about that difference shortly as we go through the different areas. So we all just have our natural strengths, our natural ways that we cope. And the thing that we can get to do now is we get to build up these different areas. And one of the most important takeaways that I'd like to really encourage everyone in this is to really incorporate flexibility. So we're human, setbacks occur, and part of being human is that we have this big prefrontal cortex, which enables us to plan, right? This is our prefrontal cortex is what's responsible for planning, for thinking about the future, for making lists. And it also means that we get very disappointed when things don't go according to our plan. And the last time that you fell short on a goal, when you didn't meet your expectations, how did you react? What did you tell yourself? It's pretty common, I think, and I would guess, especially for a lot of this group here, there's actually a lot of research on lawyers in particular and how all the sort of strong mental work that lawyers do in their professional life can also be very challenging when applied to their personal lives. And that's because this tendency to really hone in, to think, to plan, and to just dive deep in thought can be sometimes challenging to step back from, especially when we need to give ourselves a break. The image here of the bamboo is that, we are flexible, that we bend, that we don't break, right? And I think it's important, and maybe particularly for this group here, for us to think about, there's a lot of research about why flexibility is so important. And we can think of flexibility as a combination of a lot of different mental things like self-compassion, mindfulness, cognitive agility, and acceptance. So there's links here for each of these for you to check out after this talk. And to sum it up, I think flexibility means a lot of different things at different times. It's about being flexible, right? Sometimes you just need to be grateful. Sometimes you need to give yourself more self-compassion, more self-acceptance. But I really like this quote that angels can fly because they take themselves lightly. And that's just a reminder that, whenever things don't go to plan, just to take things lightly, because we're all going to fail. And that's the idea of resilience, right? That when things get tough, when there's adversity, we are able to not only bounce back, but bounce forward, right? That we can start practicing more flexibility. And so here, this kind of takeaway tip I'd love for you to try after the talk is just a 5-minute self-compassion meditation. Self-compassion is one of the most challenging things, I think, for a lot of people. I know for myself as well. I recently missed a deadline for a client and it felt terrible, but I knew why I couldn't do it, right? I didn't. I couldn't. I'm human. And I still think about it, right? It still goes through my head, but I have to really remember the things that I talk about and put this into practice, that, I'm human, I do my best, I sometimes fail, and I'm going to treat myself with the same self-compassion that I would a friend, which is the next exercise. So think about a time when a close friend felt really bad. See if you can really bring to mind the last time you were talking to a friend and they needed your support. Think about, what do you typically do and say? Think about your tone when responding to them. right? So I can picture a time I went out to dinner with a friend and I can remember, like I was listening, right? We can kind of, really put yourself into how do you respond to them, right? And then now think about when you're struggling, when you yourself are struggling, what do you typically say to yourself and in what tone? And you'll probably notice that we treat ourselves very differently than we would a friend, right? So maybe I'll give you a kind of 5 to 10 seconds of silence where you can just note anything that comes to mind here. And because next we are going to this is just a little bit more research about self-compassion, but we are quickly coming up to our first Q&A, and I think I do have some questions there, but I just want a little more research about self-compassion is available to you afterwards with all of these links. Self-compassion is very difficult because I think a lot of times we naturally think of it as we're just pitying ourselves, that we're indulging ourselves, that if I'm not hard on myself, then how will I get better, right? This is a pretty common tendency for folks to internalize. And that's because of a real psychological phenomenon called the negativity bias. Roy Baumeister, a very famous psychologist, has actually said that, I quote, "We don't have any universal laws in psychology, but ironically, the greater power of bad than good is one of the closest things we can get to a law. It's evolutionary adaptive for bad to be stronger than good." That's a pretty strong statement, right? That it's kind of evolutionarily wired in us for bad things to be worse than good. And I think of my husband as a lawyer as well. I think of often when I talk to him about the law, there's it's a lot of planning for different scenarios, right? A lot of planning for the worst case scenario, a lot of thinking about things from all angles. And, in general, right, just think about the last time you received a negative comment from someone, the last time that maybe you had a great day and then one thing didn't go well, how strongly that one negative point can really stick with us. And that's because of the negativity bias. We're so primed to hone in on the bad. And that's where, hopefully the one key point you could take away from today is that trust the research that self-compassion is needed because of that self-compassion actually helps us to combat the negativity bias, which is just so strong in us, that we need to do this. And it's possible through practice, right? Through emotional practices like meditation and some of the other things that we're going to cover. Okay, Q&A. I'm just going to take a break and look at the chat now. Very quickly in the chat. We will definitely have examples of the 5 strengths of resilience. We're going to be covering them shortly. And Q&A. Okay, so elaborating on what is meant by individual contributor. That just means in the psych or org psych research that you don't manage anyone. So you're individually contributing to your organization and you're not a manager of anyone else. And that was because of the kind of interesting research that for some reason during the pandemic, women who are not managers, they're just individual contributors, there's a wider gap in burnout for those folks than those in managerial roles. And that was, again, possibly because managers, both women and men, are being supported organizationally equally. Next question. That resilience can be learned through adversity. I think I'm saying that resilience is always demonstrated in adversity, right? That by sort of definition, you're resilient to adversity. So when a challenge, when stress happens, resilience is how we are kind of bouncing back. And then, as we say, not only bouncing back, but bouncing forward from it, that we're actually growing through adversity. And so I guess in that sense, resilience is definitely demonstrated in times of adversity. And it's, yeah, I guess I would agree, learned in that process, because we definitely need the challenge in order to in order to kind of grow. I hope that I answered those. I'm just going to click these as answered. And please continue to add in any other questions that you might see. Another comment, how do we do 5 minutes of self-compassion? Thank you. So I will kind of come back to this slide very briefly, where, you know, we can take even 5 minutes to do a practice like a self-compassion meditation. And this is an actual link to one of these exercises. I think often, you know, what's been found and what we're going to talk about shortly is that breaking things down even to the smallest, most actionable, but it seems too small that how does this actually make a difference kind of step. That's what research has found is the key to actually building these new habits. So, you know, this 5-minute self-compassion meditation, you do it every day, right? It becomes something that you are in the habit of doing when you first wake up, that the next time something happens and you're actually challenged, your brain is just more naturally than able to return to what you've been practicing, right? To that self-compassion. And so that's kind of the benefit of doing things. And as we're going to talk about in our next section about really building these habits. Another question, how do we grow or increase our resilience? Thank you. We are going right there. So I just saw another question in the Q&A. Please keep adding them and I will come back to them in the next break. All right. Habits. So I think some of the questions were starting to lead us here. How do we actually build resilience? So now we're going to talk about this now, about through habits and how do we actually create these small little routines that can help us to practice these different strengths. Okay, so quick moment, list a few habits that you can think of. So for example, what did you do when you first wake up this morning? Do you grab your phone, check your email or social media? Okay, maybe take just 10 seconds, I'm going to keep quiet, and just write down a few habits that you know you have, things that you do all the time. And what you'll probably see here is there's a lot of patterns, right? A lot of kind of natural hygiene habits that we can even think of, things like brushing our teeth, you know, maybe stretching, right? There's a lot of different things that we do, making coffee, right? And some of them are good, some of them maybe are bad or things that you know you would like to change, and some are just neutral, right? Like using the bathroom, right? These are all different habits that we have. My favorite psychologist, William James, wrote in 1892, so a long time ago, that all of our life so far as it has definite form is but a mass of habits, practical, emotional, and intellectual, systematically organized for our weal or woe and bearing us irresistibly towards our destiny. So what he's saying here is that we're really just our habits, right? Our habits make us who we are. Everything we do, whether good or bad, right, is just moving us forward. And also, what's kind of interesting here is that a lot of the things that we do every day, they're not necessarily clear choices or conscious decisions. They're just ingrained habits. And if we are what we repeatedly do, and we want to build up our resilience, we can start to actually build better habits for ourselves. So habits, there's been a lot of research recently and interest in this. William James is not alone in his fascination with it. And for the past 2 decades, habits have actually received a lot of attention from both scientists and marketers who want to understand human behavior so that they can drive our consumption patterns, right? And so the good news is that there's a lot of great resources on habits. The bad news is that there's a lot out there. So if that's overwhelming to you, like it was to me at first, you know, returning to flexibility and just compassion is important here. The main thing I think that was for us to think about in getting started about habits is that it's an ongoing practice and it's never going to end, right? By definition, sort of a habit is something you're doing. And so it's never going to be over. So when you're building up the habit of exercise, you don't get it and then you're done, right? It's like you're still doing it every day or every other day or whatever the habit is. And so there's a lot of different models of habits, but I'm going to focus on, this is the second point here, a model called the Tiny Habits model by Stanford professor BJ Fogg. And what he did is really define a tiny habit as something that you can do at least once a day that takes less than 30 seconds and requires very little effort. And the goal of this is that we need to automate our actions. The more that they can become automatic, the less that we have to think about it, the less chance that we're not going to do it, right? The best habits are the ones that really take away any need for self-control and motivation, because as we all probably know, if you rely on your motivation will change, right? You're not always motivated to work out, to be kind to yourself, right? To take out the trash, whatever it may be. We're not motivated all the time. And this is where taking away that need is so important. You don't need willpower anymore. You just need to kind of build that habit of it. And so how? There's no silver bullet to building a habit. There's just practice, right? It's like growing a plant. It takes time and nurturing. And that's really the metaphor here, is that habits are like a little tiny plant. It starts with a tiny seed. You need to have the right conditions for it to grow. And the way that we do that is that there's sort of the cue, routine, and the reward. So the routine is the habit that you're trying to develop, and the cue is the thing that will trigger it. And that's often something that's happening in your environment, right? So a really simple way to get started is to think of something you already do, like brushing your teeth. That's the existing anchor in your routine that will cue your the new habit you're trying to build. So after I brush my teeth, I will do 2 push-ups, for example, right? So the cue is the brushing your teeth, which is the anchor habit that you already do. And the routine is the new thing that you're going to do, that you're trying to actually build a new habit for. And then finally, the reward. So this can be pretty simple. It can be as easy as kind of patting yourself on the back. And BJ Fogg actually talks about how important this kind of small, and it can feel like a silly step is, but to kind of give yourself a yay or like a good job, and to actually reward yourself with this positive spark of emotion that says, you know, good job, I did it, right? And it's something that's so tiny that you can do it anytime, right? That it's just, you're like, he talks about even building a habit and putting on your shoes to go running, but not even going running, right? You're just getting that, breaking it down into the smallest step that's possible. A little bit about just how this affects organizations. You know, we're talking mostly about individual habits, but organizations are just people, and we all have our different individual habits, and they often come together in group routines or norms. So there's a couple of great books about habits, like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and he tells the story about both Alcoa, the CEO being Paul O'Neill, and about a keystone habit that can actually turn the whole organization around. Similarly, he talked about Starbucks and how they try to build better habits through the latte method, and how they, you know, really use the power of habits to not just change individuals, but to really strengthen the organization. So, you know, just for your own interest, there's 2 links here to these different stories about to see how habits often get solidified in an organization. And just to think a bit about this as well, because we're all here at work, right? We're kind of returning now to the how we're talking about habits because of burnout, right? And burnout happens in the workplace. It's an organizational, a workplace phenomenon. So can you think of any habits or routines that happen in your team or organization? Thinking about just like, what are some of the norms? What are some of the habits that just seem to be a part of your team or organizational culture? So some negative examples of this could be, maybe withholding information, gossiping, creating an overall lack of psychological safety, right? That's an underlined term. It's a pretty big one in organizational psychology, where there's a lot of research about how the best workplaces are ones in which people feel psychologically safe, where they feel like they can be who they are, they can speak their mind, they can share their opinions freely, and they won't be punished for it, right? So having this sense of psychological safety is an actual habit, right? Like people either share and share willingly, or they don't, right? And if they don't, that's often a type of habit or routine organizationally that could contribute to burnout. On the positive side, great cultures often have what are called high quality connections. This is research done by Jane Dutton at the University of Mission Business School, where she looks at positive examples of this type of habit that can happen in organizations. Okay, a quick break for questions. So you will get, yeah, I don't know if it was a buckle, but I don't think so. I got it online. Although I think I did think it looked like that as well, but not intentionally for sure. So the copy of the presentation, I believe Summer will be sharing that in some way, and maybe at the end she can share how that will be coming out to you folks, but I'll definitely be providing that as well as another takeaway document on burnout. Okay, Q&A. Should we focus more on methods that are not our defaults or strengths? Interesting. That's a really great question. So a lot of positive psychology says that, rather than just trying to focus on our weaknesses, build up our strengths, right? So you may have also heard of the Gallup Strengths Finder. That's a pretty common strengths framework that's used in the workplace. And that's all about actually how do we build or capitalize on the things that we do naturally well. So I would say, yes, a great place to start when building up strengths of resilience is to, start with what you do well naturally, keep building up the things that are good, and then occasionally, if you want to, look at the areas that are challenging for you. And I know that for myself as well, I actually do tend to just go to what's natural or strong for me, knowing that that's going to be my natural tendency anyway. And then, we all have different weaknesses or areas that we would need to improve on. And it's just good to be aware of them, I think, and to do our best as humans to just kind of work on them as we can. The name of the book about the Keystone Habit at Alcoa is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And I believe that the link in the document will take you to maybe either a podcast or a specific story about that example. Okay. Thank you for your questions. I will move on. So I know we have just 10 minutes left. I had a feeling that, we have a lot to cover. You're going to get all these slides. You're going to be able to read them. Hopefully, if we don't go through every habit, all of the 5 areas, you're still going to have a sense of how does this apply, right? How do one, what's the importance of it and why do we want to do this? 2, how do we start building habits? And then you can reference these slides in the future. Okay, so tiny habits in the area of physical strength. So this link is actually to a full article on embodied resilience, meaning resilience in your physical form. And that's because I think if physical is one of just the foundation, right? Think about when you don't get enough sleep, it can just ruin everything, right? So I have a friend who recently had her second child, and she said she's so sleep deprived, she feels like she's actually dying. And I think that there's a sleep deprivation is a form of torture, right? So when we are not getting enough sleep, when we are physically ill, right? When we aren't eating well, we can feel how that affects the rest of our mental and emotional well-being, right? When I know very strongly when I don't feel well, I'm the rest of my mind and emotions are a mess, right? And so that's where often starting with our physical well-being is such a great place to start. One, because it's pretty natural to think about building habits in this area. So examples, you know, taking practicing more mindful eating during your lunch breaks, right? There's research about this from Harvard Medical School if you're interested. This link up to the article on embodied resilience will give you, much more tips about how do you build up your body's physical resilience. And because we're thinking about this organizationally as well, we're here today thinking about burnout in the workplace. How can you help others, right? So how can you encourage other people to take even small doses of activity to ward off depression, spend time in nature, right? We can all encourage each other to take a break, to stand up, to stretch, right? These are things that help us. So what are some tiny habits for health that you can think of? And again, here you want to think, what is an anchor activity that you do? So I gave the example of brushing your teeth. You could think of other ones like, your lunch break, or one of the tiny habits examples by BJ Fogg is that after he uses the bathroom, he does 2 push-ups, right? So every time he goes to the bathroom, then he'll just then do 2 push-ups, right? And maybe over the course of the day, you're doing 10, 20 push-ups. So you can take a minute maybe and a few seconds and write to yourself, after I do this thing, what could you do? Could you put out your vitamins for the day so that you remember to take them? And this is one that I actually have to do myself. So after I make my coffee, I will put out my vitamins. So because I wasn't remembering to take them every day, I actually, after I turn on the coffee machine, I take out the vitamins. Could you do 2 push-ups? Could you put on your walking shoes? Again, you don't even have to go out and walk, but if you get in the habit every day of putting on your shoes, pretty soon you're going to start wanting to actually walk a little, around the block as well. So these are some tiny habits for health. Emotions. There's a very strong science behind positive emotions. This is again, sort of the study of positive psychology. And one of the biggest kind of theories here is called the broaden and build theory by Barbara Fredrickson, who found that positive emotions have a real evolutionary purpose. Negative emotions, really cue us to do something often, right? The fight or flight response. So if we're angry, we maybe fight back. If we're afraid, we might run away or fight, right? There's a lot of negative emotions have a purpose as well. If we're sad, we tend to retreat. But so what is the purpose of positive emotions? Barbara Fredrickson thought that they're actually to help us broaden our our mindset, and from there we can build new resources. So think about when you're in a good mood, when you're happy, you're more likely to want to talk to other people, right? When you're sad, when you're angry, you don't feel like talking to others. But when you're positive, when you're happy, you actually have the space to want to open up, to talk to other people. And from there, you can often build new resources. Social resources, like when you are talking to someone, you're maybe making a friend who will help you out in the future, right? We're social creatures, and we live in a society where our relationships matter to us. And these, resources could be actually, more money, more food, all of these things that happen when we're in a mindset to be open to them. So to build these positive emotions, you could create more morning or evening rituals, meditation. Meditation is definitely a big one. I've started to practice for a while, as you know, often as I can. Again, bringing self-compassion or flexibility to this habit, and I do it even for 2 minutes a day. Right? Apps like the Insight Timer can help you to track and just do even 2 minutes at some time in your day. I'm just going to go a little faster. So some tiny habits for positive emotion. This can be a little bit of a weird one, so I wanted to make sure to cover it. So, you know, after I wake up in the morning, I will hug my spouse, right? Sometimes we can get into the habits of, not actually taking moments to build positive emotion. So some of the habits for this could be to smile, right? To wake up, after I wake up in the morning, I will smile. I will think of something I'm grateful for. I will actually say out loud one thing I'm grateful for. Right? And I just want to go through, I'm not going to cover now, but I'm just going to show you what's left on the slides so that you can kind of see them on your own after. We have about 3 minutes left, and I'm going to turn it back to Summer right at the end so that she can give you folks the code and I can kind of wrap up. But there's a few more slides here for social examples of tiny habits for building social resilience, spiritual again, and then actually, this is a great area. Why don't we close with this poll? So what is an area that you think you want to create a new resilience habit around? And we're going to end here. So what area do you feel like you might want to create a new habit around? Just about 5 more seconds. All right, about 90% of you, and about 44% saying physical, 11 mental, 17 emotional, 20 social, and 7 spiritual. Very nice. And so the slides, should help at the end. There's definitely more content here about mental resilience. This is an area, in psychology, obviously, that's important that we think about some of these different thinking traps and examples of mental resilience that you can cover.